Welcome to the National Indian Gaming Association's The New Normal weekly webcast series. My name is Ashley Cope and I'm the marketing manager for the Indian Gaming Trade Show and Convention. I would like to share just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is muted by default except for our speakers. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question or chat box and they will be brought up at the end. This session will also be recorded and available on our website. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Victor Rocha, Conference Chairman of the National Indian Gaming Association.
Thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Rocha. I'm the Conference Chairman for the National Gaming Association. My the session co-host is Jason Giles. You know, I thought I was going to get it right all the way through this time too. It's Jason Giles from the National Gaming Association. We have a very special program today. We're talking to Tyler Burtis from Burtis Investigations and John Kucera, partner in Boies, Schiller, Flexner, which is a really good law firm. Hopefully I'll never need them, but I hope now that I have it in. You know what, first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I think this is a really special and a really unique program because, you know, one of the things that fascinates me about this industry is, you know, as I tell people, you know, if you want to go in an industry and make money, go to an industry that makes money. And there's nothing like gaming that generates the type of revenue that it does. And it's just really mind-blowing when you really stop and think about the amount of revenue that goes to these casinos. But, you know, one of the things that happened during this pandemic was that has never happened in our lifetimes before is that the world shut down. And not only, you know, with the closure of these international borders and stuff like that, it wasn't just people that were stopped, but it was the whole black market and the whole economy in this black market. And you know, one thing that I've learned about this industry and life in general is that, you know, when you're dealing with dirty money, it has to go somewhere. You can't just sit on it. And our special guests know a thing or two about this. And let me introduce him. Tyler, how you doing, my friend? Welcome.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for inviting us to this incredible platform that you have.
Well, you know, listen, it's an honor to have you too. And John Kucera, welcome. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Well, you know, let's give our listeners a little background. Tyler, can you give our listeners a little background on who you are and why you're an expert on AML?
Sure. Well, I never claim to be an expert on anything, but I have about 30 years in government work. For the past over 20 years, I was with the California Department of Justice, and for a large portion of that, I was with the Bureau of Gambling Control under the Department of Justice. So a large section of my job was dealing with money laundering, financial crime issues that were taking place in and around casinos, both card rooms and tribal casinos throughout the state of California. I've spoken nationally with the National Tribal Gaming Commissioner Regulators Association on this issue. I also was invited to speak on behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office to the Attorney General's White Collar Crime and Financial Crime Advisory Board, which was quite an honor. Again, it's a unique niche, it's a unique area. And I think for the most part, people are involved in this anti-money laundering. You have a lot of CPAs, you have a lot of financial people, and it's really a unique opportunity to bring a holistic view in how we address money laundering issues nationwide and internationally. So
I'm so glad you're not an expert. You know, I don't know what I would do. And Mr. Kucera, again, welcome. And just you know, John was kind enough to join us. He's on vacation in Hawaii. And John, we really appreciate you having here. So could you give our readers a little background on who you are?
Sure. I don't share Tyler's modesty. I do consider myself an expert in this field. For the past dozen years or so, up until just last year, I was a federal prosecutor and assistant United States attorney in Los Angeles. The last 6 of those years, I was the coordinator of the High Intensity Financial Crime Task Force in Southern California. During that time, prosecuted financial institutions, lots and lots of money launderers, maybe most notably importantly for this conversation, the Normandy Card Club Casino in Los Angeles. And I did that along working with Tyler when we were both government employees. I've also spoken nationally, spoken all over the world on money laundering. I was one of the prosecutors on the Malaysian Sovereign Wealth Fund matter, which is maybe after the Marcos Philippines kleptocracy case, the largest single theft from a foreign nation and money laundering event in the history of the world, right up there with Madoff in terms of the amount of money stolen. Before that, I prosecuted the LA Garment District cases, where the largest single day US cash seizure in the history of the United States, seizing over $100 million in cash, most of which was money that was derived from narcotics proceeds, primarily from the Sinaloa cartel. That's the kind of thing that we might be discussing later when we're talking about money laundering techniques. So very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, again, in my role with Pachanga.net, I have this pleasure or honor to really see the industry from my 10,000 foot view. And, the whole money laundering thing has always been fascinating. When we started tribal gaming in California, that was like one of the first things that they threw at us. And with good cause in the beginning too. There were some early tribal casinos that were dealing with money issues. And in the very beginning, they thought we were a bunch of saps and stuff like that. But once 2000 came around and the tribes were much more sophisticated, and I think, Tyler, you will agree to this, that you started seeing more sophistication with the tribes, and they've really learned that how important it is to protect the revenue stream, to protect the industry if they want to have a sustainable business. But I think again, money laundering has always been part of this industry. You know what I mean? And I think it's like you said, it's very important that we have regulations in place to make sure that our industry is sustainable and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about the pandemic. What happened to all this dirty money during the pandemic? Let's talk about China. Before we get into California, before we get into the United States, because I find China one of the most fascinating markets in the world. You see the Chinese government really cracking down on it. And as soon as they crack down in Macau, you see it popping up in British Columbia, you see it popping up in Saipan, you see it popping up in Australia. Tell our listeners a little about this. And John?
Sure. Well, one of the reasons that let me back up a little bit. You were saying earlier in your introductory comments how the world shut down, and that's obviously true, right? That affected everyone. One of the things that didn't shut down though was illegal narcotic sales, and that generates lots and lots of cash in the United States, and that cash has to go somewhere because you can't just put it back into the financial institutions without anyone noticing. That's the kind of thing that requires someone who's like kind of a skilled money launderer to know how to go about insinuating it back into the system. And as you were saying, money finds its own level. So what did shut down was the ability of these expert money launderers to get that dirty money back into the system and make it appear clean, right? The whole point of money laundering is that you're using legitimate systems, the legitimate financial institutions and business to make that illegal money look legal. It doesn't make any sense to use illegal money and other illegal enterprises if your goal is to try and make someone look like they earned that legitimately. And money finds its own level, right? Money is like water. It takes the path of least resistance. It goes to the easiest place. And one of the places that it tries to go is casinos. Now, in China, you've got another kind of unique situation, which is the need for capital flight. So Chinese nationals are only allowed to move $50,000 per year per national out of China, very often in the United States. And the reason that so many of them do that is because China can seize all of your money and doesn't have the protections that the United States affords people of like a constitution that prohibits the seizing of money without due process. China can sort of do this and just retroactively ask questions later if they want to. So you have a lot of people who have been making a lot of money over the years who are afraid that their money might get seized. Very, very rich people, people who are even, middle class, people who are trying to get their money into the United States, maybe to support a family. And so one of the ways that happens is there's a very informal banking system that will move money from China, sometimes just by a phone call, to the United States. And so money in the United States that is very often cash proceeds. These two sort of needs have gotten together, right? So the need in China to move money out of China, and the need very often in the United States of drug dealers with lots of cash who need to get that cash back into a system. One of the ways that those two things fit each other is the movement of legitimate money that was earned legitimately in China. A phone call will be made where a middleman will take the cash in the United States, the illegal drug proceeds, and call someone in China to release funds into certain bank accounts that middleman identifies, and take the cash here in the United States. So it's got a bunch of different names, flying money, Hawala systems. It's a very ancient and informal way of moving money. And so to your earlier point, a lot of this has built up during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of money. The drug sales have not quit. The demand for Chinese nationals to move their money out of China has not quit. So all that money just keeps rising. And now that the world is starting to reopen, there's a demand from both of those sides to start moving their money back into the regular and legitimate financial institution.
It's so fascinating.
And Victor, I would just add on that note, if you want to commingle, you want to hide your transactions while you're laundering money with normal business. If you shut down normal business, it makes it virtually impossible to move that money. So that's not just casinos. You had, everything shut down. So if you have a storefront that's just there to launder money and it's shut down, you have locked down the entire system. So not only did you quarantine the United States, you essentially quarantined all the movement of that money as well, the illegal proceeds. However, the crimes continued, frauds continued. And I'll clarify why I never consider myself an expert, because I'm constantly learning every day. I never stop reading on new issues. I know, Victor, you're the same way. The other thing, the National Defense Authorization Act just changed several things within the anti-money laundering program as well. So again, another learning curve and issues that are coming up. The Chinese money can also move from Chinese account to Chinese account in China. And the cash that needs to be moved in the United States can be given to the gambler, and then the gambler expends those funds that never had to leave the United States, but yet the money was transferred internally between two Chinese accounts.
It's really, really quite amazing how dynamic it is. You know what I mean? It's always adapting, and like you said, the money has to go somewhere, and water finds its own place. Tyler, how does this affect our industry? How is this affecting our industry?
So as the banks became more and more in line with AML procedures, and I say that loosely because Citibank just got hit with a $300 million fine by FinCEN. I'm sorry, that was Capital One. The director of FinCEN just went to Citi, but Capital One was hit with a substantial, significant fine. So, but more or less, the FinCEN was going after the banks significantly several years ago. They kind of caught on, tightened their controls, tightened different issues, some banks. And so again, kind of going to that path of water that John refers to is, where do you go from here? Where is the next easiest location? When I've talked about anti-money laundering programs within casinos nationwide, I always start my class with a room full of people. In most cases, they're already the compliance people. They're already the people that know about AML compliance. but yet they're sitting through the class. What I like to see is people that don't know as much about AML compliance, the other people, the executives, the people that have the purse strings that fund the compliance department, and talk to them about the reality of what's happening within the casino environment. What I'll frequently ask first off is how many people in the room have ever worked at a bank or a financial institution? And hardly anybody ever raises their hand. And then I quickly, and these are even expert compliance people that I'm talking to, and I quickly correct them and say, actually, everybody, how many people in here work at a casino? And then everybody raises their hand. I said, well, every one of you works at a financial institution as long as your casino is making over $1 million a year, according to FinCEN and anti-money laundering programs. So you are, if you shift that perspective that we're not just here in an entertainment venue, we are actually working in a financial institution. And do you give loans without doing due diligence on people? Do you, loan money without going in to see where that money can be paid back? You look at markers. There's so many different areas that are risks that if you don't have a proper risk assessment based on where you're at, it can become a problem. But I think the biggest thing is shifting that perspective from an entertainment venue to truly a financial institution, and not just a financial institution, but one that's being targeted by a variety of different criminal organizations and people that are involved in fraud. One of the things John talked about was narcotics trafficking. And I think many people, auditors, compliance people, we're used to seeing that presentation of the drug trafficker that's laundering money in the casino. When in reality, fraud has now surpassed the amount of illegal proceeds that need to be laundered in the United States. So now that profile of person that you're perceiving to be laundering money is more likely a middle-aged female than what you'd perceive normally as a television drug trafficker type of thing. So shifting those perspectives on where that money is going, and just the diverse population that needs to move money, it's way beyond drug traffickers, and shifting that, and how do we look for that new model? Again, going about it, constantly learning. If you did a risk assessment on your anti-money laundering program a year and a half or 2 years ago, well, then you're completely missing PPP and PPE fraud, which is now one of the largest areas and one of the biggest targets of the U.S. Attorney's Office now, is going after that fraud. So if those people are moving the money through the casino, which has already happened, there's already been a conviction for it, from those types of fraud, that's another whole shift in perspective of what are we looking for here.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I asked you gentlemen here is because you're both involved in this organization called the Tribal Affairs Task Force. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that's going to help Indian country?
Tyler, do you want to start? Want me to start?
No, go ahead, John.
Sure. So the idea was that there are a lot of issues that are unique nationwide, but particularly in California to tribal casinos. And tribal casinos is sort of our first foray into that, just because of, as you were saying, Victor, the amount of money that it generates. And that amount of money makes a casino, any business, an attractive target for money launderers. And that's Tyler and my background. So we felt we should start trying to offer something to the tribes, and specifically the tribal casinos, to try and help deal with the sort of drive of money launderers to target that. But then there are all sorts of other issues. There are issues that, aside from the money laundering, issues that of disputes between the states and the tribes on compact issues, disputes between the tribal casinos and the California card rooms. And those are somewhat particular to California, but there are similar analogs in other states. And then one of the other cases I prosecuted when I was towards the end of my time at the U.S. Attorney's Office was the Backpage case, which was an online classified that was essentially just a clearinghouse for prostitution, and even worse, human trafficking and child prostitution. And that has been a very serious issue in Native American lands, and tribal lands have been particularly susceptible to that. And then my firm also handles the opioid litigation with Cherokee Nation, and that has been another very specific problem that has targeted Native Americans, and one of the things that we're looking to try and reach out and work with more tribes on.
Wow. Wow.
I would just add that I was honored. One of the things that I like about this Tribal Affairs Task Force is, over the years working in government, I was always creating alliances, task forces, working groups. And the reason being is everybody brings a different aspect to something, different background, a diverse knowledge base. And so John and I already worked very well together for several years in the high intensity financial crime area task force. With the background that I had, I worked with John. I am contracted by Boies Schiller with John for the Tribal Affairs Task Force. I also created my own company, Burtis Investigations, and really looking at to fill a niche in the sense of, with a lack of police resources in the United States, the retirements, the attrition, and really a lack of expertise that's now going into retirement. I saw a niche that really could fill something to work not only with Boies Schiller, with John, but also to look at how do we provide services to an attorney general of a tribe or a general counsel of a tribe for investigations that can be done confidentially, and then also presented for prosecution if that's the direction the tribe wants to go. But this Tribal Affairs Task Force is exciting in the sense that it is made up of a group of people that already work well together, that already know each other, a group of people that want to provide this service. It wasn't something that was tasked to somebody. This is something that we see as important. We see that we can fill a void and a niche. Part of Burtis Investigations, I have Olin Jones, who was the director of Native American Affairs for 4 different attorneys general. He was the direct advisor on tribal issues. I now have that resource to provide to people, including Boies Schiller with John Kucera. We have other Native Americans that have private investigator background that would also like to join on and take on these types of cases. We do a variety of cases, but due diligence is important. One of the areas I look at in due diligence and anti-money laundering within casinos is coming in and looking at employees. We know your customer. A big thing in compliance is know your customer. How much of your attention is spent on the customer versus your employee that is responsible for protecting your tribe, protecting your casino from millions and millions of dollars in fines. Even the bank, if you look at the banks will have a very limited hiring process, but then do a very thorough screening of their customers. But yet it takes that bank employee, much like the cardroom dealer, wherever the weak link is, that's where it's going to find. So bringing the expertise from a holistic view, a task force approach. There's other law firms that may have a tribal section, but do they have somebody like John's background that has actually prosecuted these major cases internationally? Somebody with my background that has investigated for years, not just a few months or, hey, I worked in the casino industry for a while, but years of experience, and not just investigations, but tribal issues, government affairs across the board, by bringing in people. I used to work hand in hand with Olin Jones on a variety of issues, not just casino issues. So it's exciting. And there's another attorney with Boies Schiller that is Native American that's on board. That collaborative process to see the emails going and the ideas flowing is what I enjoy. And that's what makes the Tribal Affairs Task Force so exciting.
So it sounds like the tribes will be able to have access to like a strike force type of talent for dealing with these types of problems and issues, right?
And that's kind of our goal. I mean, there are a lot of attorneys who will get involved in these and not be sensitive to a lot of the sovereignty issues that are at play in anytime you're dealing with tribal groups. Even in something as complicated as like the opioid litigation or going after some of the other sort of tangential players in the opioid litigation, like McKinsey Consulting. There are going to be a bunch of settlements that are happening, and the states are going to do the best they can to assert their sovereignty, right? Individual state sovereignty, and say that they get to a certain portion of the money from that settlement to make their citizens whole. Well, tribes have maybe even a superior claim to sovereignty than a state does, and they, you know, historically have been shortchanged when those settlements come to pass. And so that there needs to be someone who's a zealous advocate for each of the tribes and trying to make sure that they get their share when their people have been victimized.
So, and your company, Boies, that Boies is David Boies, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
He's never
the
heard
name partner. Yeah,
never.
lesser known attorney. Yeah,
doesn't ring a bell. Doesn't ring a bell.
Victor, that's also another thing I think was important. Is when I looked to join forces with John again and putting this Tribal Affairs Task Force, you're talking about a powerhouse law firm. You know, if we can get an alliance of tribes together with a powerhouse law firm and this task force that essentially can address so many different issues within tribes and tribal casinos, I think is obviously I'm part of it. I think it's a winning model and beneficial for everybody.
Jason, you had a question?
Yeah, so thanks for joining us today, guys.
Pleasure.
I bring this subject up lightly because I don't want it to derail the rest of the time, because it easily could. But digital currency, we're getting a lot of inquiries. People are going to tribes saying you should start your own digital currency, or you should accept digital currency at your casinos. Don't worry about the federal laws; they don't apply to you. Stuff like that. Just for our audience, so as far as I've read and been up to date on, the Treasury Department, FinCEN, they haven't budged on any of this Bitcoin stuff or anything. The problem is that you're seeing banks now, accepting Bitcoin and things of that nature more and more. You know, Tesla is now going to accept Bitcoin for payment for their cars.
PayPal.
I am so skeptical of it all because I just don't know where any of it goes. And from what I've been told and what I've read, those digital currencies are the A-list for money laundering right now. I mean, that's, and I've had buddies show me, you can go on there and you can just see some incredible transactions going on Bitcoin, and it's all unregulated. And I just can't help but think it's all, dirty money going through there. But that's a sort of a simplistic view when you.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I mean, look, you're right. We could talk about this for as long as you want to talk about it. But I will try and give you my really 50,000 foot perspective on it.
Okay.
I agree with you that in the United States, there is very little rationale for the legitimate use of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. We've got a very robust financial institutions in the United States. There's all sorts of protections that are built in for people. There's little reason that people should fear using the banking institutions in the United States. They've been working pretty well since the Great Depression. So I, particularly as a former prosecutor, when I was a prosecutor, looking at any time someone would be using Bitcoin in the United States, I would be like, what possible motive could they have to do that other than to shield themselves from scrutiny? And I think that's true. Maybe that oversimplifies it a bit, because there's some reasons that people like to be shielded from scrutiny, and there are people who are just privacy advocates who don't like the idea of it. Tax protesters, that's a little closer to illegality. This conversation changes a little bit when you bring in foreign countries, right? Like sort of the same motivations we were talking about with China, with capital flight and trying to protect their money. That exists with Bitcoin, and China has banned or severely regulated all cryptocurrency as a result, right? China does not want some third party to have control of a financial institution that's sort of a shadow financial institution running parallel to its own, where people can go and use that institution and hide their money. Iran, for example, a lot of people in Iran who are dissidents and trying to support Iranian dissident, there are legitimate reasons to use it. That being said, those legitimate reasons are very much outweighed by the illegitimate reasons here in the United States. And Jason, to your point, the majority of people in the United States who are using it in these enormous transactions are either speculating, because you're right, it's wholly unstable, right? The United States currency is what's called fiat currency, where it's just issued with nothing behind it, right? We're no longer on the gold standard. But what you do have, and is explained on every dollar, is that it has the full faith and credit of the United States, right? I mean, so when you get any money in the United States, basically the entire government of the United States is saying, we stake our reputation on this being legal tender that someone can trust and trade back and forth. As you can see by the wild fluctuation in crypto, that's not the case, right? I mean, crypto's value is what everyone who owns crypto says its value is. And that could plummet tomorrow, that could skyrocket back up to 60,000. But also, to your point, the more financial institutions that get involved, the more monster corporations like Tesla that decide that they're going to start using it, that starts legitimizing it. That starts meaning that those fluctuations are probably going to be less wild. So leading then to the question of whether the casino should be involved, whether the tribe should be involved, there are good reasons to think why you might want to do it. I've come to believe that it is the future, that there is no stopping it. That genie is out of the bottle. It's going to keep going. I wish to God I would have invested in it when I first heard about it when I was a prosecutor. And at the time I said, oh, it's trading chickens back and forth. That's all it's going to be. That's all it'll ever be. I suffer every day when I look at how much it's worth and know how wrong I was. That being said, there's a primacy on Bitcoin being first. If the tribes were to create their own, that is historically, these things are successful when there's sort of a critical mass of users. And if the tribes were to get together, or casinos were to get together and put these things forward, there's a reason to expect, historically at least, obviously no one can promise anything, no one's crystal ball is perfect, but looking at the way that these things have worked in the past, there's a reason to think that might be something that's successful. There are offshore gaming platforms that trade tokens back and forth in an effort to try and get around the law of whether you're engaged in illicit gaming. And those tokens are essentially just their own crypto, and they sell on the secondary market, and people are buying them back and forth. Now, for AML purposes, for money laundering purposes, it's really no different, right? It doesn't really change the way you work. It just changes sort of the steps involved. So when we're talking about AML and money laundering being like water and finding its own level, well, now you've got one more step that you've got to look at. You've got to look at crypto. How is the crypto getting into the system? How are you engaging with it? And the single most important part about AML, in my experience, is what's called know your customer. And you've got to know what the customer is doing. Why is that customer engaged in the behavior he or she is engaged in? And using crypto might just be something that's easy. It might be someone who is coming over from China and using cryptocurrency. And in the United States, that's not necessarily illegal. You're in a little bit of a gray area, because sometimes for money laundering purposes, a foreign felony can constitute the predicate crime for money laundering, but that's getting really esoteric and theoretical. But if you know your customer and you're doing your due diligence, crypto is really not all that more difficult to watch for than any of your other AML compliances.
Hey, Jason, one of the other things I would
add.
Victor,
I think you're muted.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jason, one other thing I would add on my regulator side of that is, for about probably the past year, this is public information. I took it from an article just this morning because I wanted to prepare for this and I want to make sure it was touched upon is BitPay. Essentially is a credit card. It appears as if it's just a Visa card. You use it as such, but yet it's funded through virtual currency. So one of the things I was concerned about, and I was letting casinos know for the past year, is that if somebody's coming up with this BitPay Visa card, you really don't know what account is funding that card. So in other words, I was giving an example. I could be sitting in China, transfer money to that BitPay card through whatever virtual currency, Bitcoin or whatever, and I fund that account. The person can then walk into the casino 5 minutes later in your neighborhood and withdraw, use it to gamble, withdraw cash from, that type of thing, and that transfers money. This was not a hypothetical. It was going around, and just recently, within the past few weeks, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, frequently referred to as OFAC, just hit BitPay with about a $500,000 fine. So adding another level of review, another AML program entity within the casino is important, because that $500,000 fine, the real fine that it could have been from OFAC was 600 million fine. And in their research, they identified that the funds were coming into that BitPay account into the United States. So somebody's using that card in the United States, and they identified Cuba, North Korea, Sudan, Iran, and Syria as virtual currency accounts that were funding the cards being used in the United States. So again, know your customer. You need to know where the funds are coming behind that card as well.
You know, I have a couple of things. First of all, last night it was announced that China is launching their own cryptocurrency. And so the ramifications from this are pretty huge, especially when it comes to anti-money laundering and stuff like that. So you have a government behind it. And then also, you know, if you look at what North Korea's been doing, that whole thing, and they're bribing and they're hacking, and that's all been done in digital currencies, and that's how they're generating billions and billions of dollars in revenue. So that is definitely an issue that we're going to be touching on. Now, I'd like to change the subject a little bit because of our time. And we talked about penalties. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a big announcement that a California card club called Artichoke Joe's had one of the largest fines in California history. I believe it was a $5 million. Hold on, I got it right here. Like a $5 million federal fine, and then they did a state fine. What was that about, Tyler? You probably know more about this than I do.
Well, I can't talk about some things because I just left the California Department of Justice in December.
I apologize.
I can't talk about ongoing or things I may have been involved in. Well, I can tell you what was in the newspaper and what was publicly released. You know, you're looking at concerns, and I think what we can learn from that, not just card rooms, but tribal casinos as well, is you're going to get a multitude of fines. It's not just FinCEN coming after you. So obviously with the Regulatory Act, depending on what, in that situation, they received a fine both from FinCEN and the state regulators as well. So again, if you're looking at AML violations and AML program issues, OFAC is another one. OFAC is the one that hit BitPay. So there's a variety of different areas and angles that you got to be covering. One of the things I want to talk about real quick, and it's related to what you just asked, but going back to BitPay, the reason why that went from 600 million to 500,000 was because they had people come in and help them mitigate those things, which is exactly what the Tribal Affairs Task Force does, is come in and help mitigate right away, hopefully prevent it from ever happening ahead of time, but then come in and mitigate it and reduce that fine, as opposed to some attorneys. And I think what you saw there in that situation was the fine actually went up. And what was the content, the release? I just read it again this morning so I can make sure I stayed within what was publicly released. But it was failure to advise, right? It was failure to advise the regulators they were under investigation was a part of it. So not only are you under investigation by FinCEN, but failing to notify the regulators that you're under investigation can also add additional fines onto the behavior that created the original fine to begin with. You can also look at Hawaiian Gardens back in the day. All of these issues that we talk about in different card rooms, including Artichoke Joe's, I would have the listeners all go to the FinCEN, Financial Crime Enforcement Network, FinCEN website, and read the assessments. there are a gold mine of training material and information, and you're going to get a lot more than what you're going to get from the newspaper. But if you go read those assessments that are on the FinCEN public information, it is unbelievable the amount of information and how bad some of these situations were before they were actually ever held accountable.
You know, but the California cardholders, they've been subjected to more money laundering raids than all U.S. forms of gambling combined. So why is money laundering such an issue with the California card rooms? I mean, again and again and again, we can go Matrix, we can go Normandy, we can go, I mean, listen, I have all this information. So why is this such a big issue in California?
I think one is you have a regulating body that was actually paying attention. So number one, you had people that knew what they were looking for, and they were holding people accountable. I'm not suggesting other states don't, but I can tell you that was a focus. And I told the card rooms back in 2014 that was going to become a focus in the area that I was in charge of, which was Southern California. So there was no gotcha games. There was no, I told tribal casinos the same thing nationwide, that, FinCEN's paying attention, IRS is paying attention. And it's not just to pick on a card room. It's not to pick on a tribal casino from the regulator standpoint. It's that the regulators, FinCEN, as well as law enforcement, saw where's a weak link, where it's shifting from the banks and quote unquote traditional financial institutions, and it's going to be pushed into other financial institutions. As I said at the beginning of this webinar, is the casinos, tribal casinos, as well as card rooms, are financial institutions. So if you have weak links in that financial institution, one of the things is law enforcement agencies operate off information. So where is the information coming from? Is the information coming from a disgruntled employee? Is it coming from another card room? Is it coming from another tribal casino? Where is the information coming from? So one explanation is it's occurring everywhere. I can assure you, this is not unique to California. It's occurring everywhere. I think that you had a regulatory body that was being educated. I think you had partnerships like I had with John and the High Intensity Financial Crime Area Task Force that developed cases and developed leads. You had progressive and knowledgeable prosecutors that would take the case, like John and Alexander Schwab with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, Michael Suhoy. You had a team of people that knew how to do these cases and that would take them on. Quite frankly, I've worked years with attorneys, and there's some attorneys that wouldn't want to touch something that's outside their comfort zone. So if you have even investigators are the same way. If you have investigators that are not willing to look at a financial track, really it's a difficult case in some circumstances to identify where the money flow is coming from. You may have investigators that don't want to do it. So it really takes the right team to address it, but also the weak link. If you're not paying attention, you don't have the tight controls, the regulations, if you're getting greedy with what money you're taking, you're opening yourself up for fines as well as moving illegal money.
Victor, I mean, to that point, just to highlight that, you obviously enjoy this stuff and like the cops and robbers aspect of it and sort of like, the sort of mental gymnastics that are necessary to see how this is working and what people have to do. And I do too. I loved it. I had a blast with it. I mean, you don't want to say that you're enjoying finding crime because that suggests that crime is a good thing. But there's certainly no crime with loving your job, and it's fun, right? But the barriers to entry are kind of high. First, understanding what it's all about, getting your head around it, and learning it takes a long time, right? I mean, like a lot of federal prosecutors are doing, like, one of the reasons we talked about narcotics and what prosecutors call dope, just all illegal drugs. Dope cases are easy, right? I mean, you can get really, really complicated in terms of the conspiracies, and that gets very, very wide and lots of people involved, but it's never more than a couple inches thick, right? It's not all that complicated. Someone selling drugs to someone else and getting paid in one of a variety of ways. Robbing a bank, not all that complicated, but getting into the weeds and understanding, like having to go through financial spreadsheets and look at the movement of money, like SWIFT sheets across international boundaries, and looking at federal crimes, state crimes, which crimes constitute the predicate crime for money laundering in the first place. We were just talking a little bit about foreign felonies and having to get into that, it's really complicated. But once you sort of get your hands around it, it starts making sense, and then you kind of enjoy it a little bit, where you're trying to think like the money launderer, right? I mean, you like all of the times that I teach on, or when I was teaching other federal prosecutors on money laundering, I would use like scenes from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, because those were really compelling and interesting. And there's a scene where, like, I assume most people are familiar with that. There's a scene where Saul, the lawyer, is explaining to Pinkman, one of the money launderers, one of the drug dealers, why he should buy a nail salon, because it's a cash business and it's easy to launder your money through it. And I would get permission from the producers to use those things in teaching. And it makes it really interesting. And once you're doing it, it's fun. So to Tyler's point, why is it that we were as successful as we were? Because we had a group of people who really got used to it early on and really enjoyed it and went out looking for it. And we kind of picked that as our specialty. So it's happening everywhere. I think we just got a little bit better at catching them.
Yeah. One second, Tyler. I know we have like a little less than 15 minutes, but I want to tell our listeners that we're actually doing a dual platform stream. We're on Clubhouse right now, and after the program's over, we will be on Clubhouse for another 15 minutes and stuff like that to answer questions. So if you go to the chat box in there, there's a link. Jesse put a link in there to Clubhouse. So just letting you know, we're doing multiple streaming, and so it isn't just on Zoom. We're on Clubhouse right now, and eventually, real soon, we'll be doing those also multi formats, platforms. Excuse me. So go ahead. I apologize. I just wanted to get that.
No problem. Just to kind of talk to John, this is another thing I used to tell agents all the time that I worked with. Agents want to work something that brings meaning to their cases. They want to bring meaning to their job. Most people get into law enforcement to make a difference and make a change. Well, this was my selling point for AML. Is there are so many victims. I'm actually going to use the actual numbers here. And this is from the National Money Laundering Risk Assessment. So these are not my numbers. These are factual numbers from the federal government. If you look at, there is approximately $300 billion of domestic financial crime in the United States. $300 billion. Of financial crime. That needs to move. That needs to go somewhere. But here's the kicker. It's so much focused on drug trafficking, and people can distance themselves with, well, I'm not involved with the drugs and it's just drug money, that type of thing. In reality, like I said earlier, equal and has recently surpassed the drug money is bank fraud, consumer fraud, healthcare fraud, securities fraud, and tax refund fraud. And now you can add the COVID refund fraud, is now the largest share. Healthcare fraud alone is $100 billion annually that needs to be moved. So remove the drug trafficking aspect to it. It's there and it's equal to this. This is now surpassing. But one of the things that fraud has in common, drugs, human trafficking, corruption, but all those frauds, we are all victims of that. I would much rather have $100 billion going to help people impacted by COVID. I'd rather have it go help people with cancer than go into the fraud and corruption. The money is going places. It's going to the weakest link in the financial institutions, which a large weak link right now in the United States are casinos. And so when you look at the fraud aspect of it, and you look at our parents are victims, one of the highest increases in suspicious activity reports with FinCEN was dealing with elder abuse and elder fraud. Well, how many, you walk through a casino, and any casino, and what is the population during the week, midday in that casino? Elderly people, sometimes with a caregiver, sometimes with a paid caregiver, putting money into a machine. Do all those people sitting there in those wheelchairs hooked up to oxygen tanks know where their retirement is going? Is that caregiver the one that's really pumping the money in? When they ticket out, does the caregiver tell that person really how much they won when they go refund that ticket? So when you shift that perspective of that kind of money and where that money is going, what's happening, I think brings a new meaning and importance to AML and AML programs. It's all part of us trying to stop this type of fraud. and nothing has changed from when I worked, whether it be from the government or now in private sector. Nothing's changed in my perspective in trying to put a stop to the money flow. But now I want to help and make sure I help to stop the money flow and mitigate circumstances for clients as well as the tribes when addressed with regulatory action. But again, I can't emphasize enough, it brings meaning to the cases. It brings meaning to an AML program. And when you look at subject versus transactional, you can have accountants come in and look at AML spreadsheets or look for AML issues, and it's all numbers. It changes that perspective when you're thinking about victims and you're looking at subjects and bringing a holistic view to an AML program, much like John and I are doing with the Tribal Affairs Task Force.
And one last thing, I know that we're running on time, and I'll make this as brief as I can, but just to sort of tie that up, one of the things that Tyler and I try to talk about when we're lecturing at like financial institutions and casinos on AML compliance is that it can be, you know, you're doing the right thing by looking at these victims and trying to make sure that they are protected and ensuring a robust compliance department. But it can be kind of fun, and instead of teaching people just to march down like a punch list of things that they have to worry about or look at, if people understand just a little bit about the basics of money laundering, you've now empowered them to go out and use their own personal like background and their own skill sets in their normal jobs and sort of become like investigators on their own and see something really unusual. And those tips are great. Why did this person behave this way? And if they've been trained a little bit on it and they're sensitive to it, and they start looking at it like, why is this person trying to run the system? Is he trying to shoot the gaps of the compliance and then go and find someone to report it to? That is a far more effective program than someone who just has this sort of like mechanical checklist of things to be looking for.
Yeah, Jason, so what do we think, man? You know, I mean, money laundering and prevention have always been a very important pillar in tribal gaming. You know, yep. And we go ahead.
If I could get, you know, Tyler's and John's perspective real quick on these last two issues. Two of the things we're advocating for right now, and it's always going to be a hard road to hoe on these, the suspicious activity reports. Casinos don't like filling those out, you know, at the level that they're at right now. They are, and they can be for some of these small rural tribal casinos. They can be burdensome because, you know, they got a rich guy in town that gambles there all the time, and they're always pushing out these SARs on them. And also we have the slot reporting limit, which is very low. It's $1,199. So all jackpots above that immediately generate, you know, a tax, a W-2, and the industry really wants to raise those rates. But from folks of your perspective, we get a lot of pushback saying it's money laundering, and the higher you raise those limits, the more wide open you are for money laundering. I guess, is there any kind of
happy medium
somewhere in there? Correct. You know, with the SARs, with the slot table minimum reporting. What do you guys think on those two issues?
I'll quickly speak to the SARs,
okay,
because I've got more experience with that and Tyler can speak to the other point. Look, SARs are very helpful to law enforcement, and it is also part of the Bank Secrecy Act, part of the law that casinos comply with it. So both parties have an incentive in making sure that these get done. That being said, so many SARs are filed all the time that it is, when you're like me and you're trying to find what is suspicious and what isn't, it's not just a needle in a haystack, it's a needle in a haystack of needles. You don't know what you're looking for, and separating the signal from the noise is really complicated sometimes. So in the case you're talking about, where you've got like a smaller casino and a rich guy who's coming in, the know your customer part is really important there, right? Because, you know, I know this guy, he comes in all the time. He spends $20,000 sitting there and at a time, and it's not suspicious anymore, right? I've filed my first suspicious activity report on him. I now maintain a file on this guy because he's a known customer. He comes in all the time. You know, arguably, you don't have to file a SAR on that guy every time now, simply because he's not behaving suspiciously. Your compliance is robust. You've done your background. You've done your due diligence. There's nothing about this guy, right? He's an entrepreneur. He's a famous doctor or whatever he is that's allowing him to have this kind of wealth that he can do this. And so this is no longer suspicious because it's not just some unknown guy rolling in, driving up in a Lamborghini, 25 years old, and where the hell did he get that kind of money? And you've never heard of him or seen him before. And so you file a SAR on that. So there's a little bit of an art to it. And if there were ever a problem down the line and some guy used to have my job comes up and looks at it, and you've got a file that can explain why you didn't file SARs on this guy, and let's say something happened, you're not going to have as hard of a time as you otherwise might if you've done your KYC.
Jason, that's an excellent point. And I am in the private sector now, so I have no reason to tell you something that's not accurate when it comes to SARs. I will tell you SARs are being read. They are important. So in the government side, people say, oh no, they're important, because you think, oh, the government, of course they're going to say that. But I will tell you they are important. But I can also tell you that proper training, we come in and train somebody that's looking at these things. You have a trained up staff, not just your compliance person, but the staff that knows what to look for with red flags. That can actually reduce the paperwork. That can actually reduce the number of SARs. And guess what? You're going to write better SARs. And I don't want to look through 25 SARs and 20 of them are garbage. I want to know the 5 good ones. Well, if you can reduce the number of SARs through training and due diligence, you're actually doing a win-win for law enforcement as well as the casino. So when they're complaining there's too many SARs, my question would be, are you SARing the right information? Just like John mentioned, if you know that's the rich guy in the neighborhood, the customer, the background, that's not a SAR. So you shouldn't be doing a SAR on it, nor as a law enforcement officer would I want to see that SAR, because it's a red herring. Now I'm going to start looking at this guy when there's nothing suspicious about him, right? So that is number one. I think a lot of it goes back to training, and due diligence. People that know how to do due diligence, and not just that, but due diligence on your employee. If your whole AML program is that one trusted AML compliance person and you're taking advice from them, what if that person doesn't know what they're doing or they're bad? You have now taken down the whole casino if that's where all your gambling, no pun intended. The other issue, and I've heard this numerous times, the $10,000 mark on the CTR. That was created in the 70s. Look at how much more, it didn't account for inflation. This is my response to that. It didn't account for inflation. It's still $10,000, but you have completely changed the dynamic of the financial institutions in the United States since that time. I don't carry cash. I hate carrying cash. I use a debit card or a credit card with points for everything, right? So although it didn't change for inflation, I would argue the point that it's less likely now why you would be carrying around $10,000 in cash, because you have so many different avenues, including virtual currency, to move money. You don't need to carry cash. So I think that nowadays, if anybody's spending over $10,000 on a regular basis, that is, it could be suspicious just based on the fact that most people don't carry cash around anymore. It's all a card, right? I will give you the slot machine. I think that's low. I think especially with the dollar amounts of slot machines, I don't see a huge issue with that. I will tell you there's bill stuffing where people are on video. This isn't just my opinion or something, but on video, just literally stuffing bills into machines to trade that money out, right? I'm a low-level drug dealer. I'm ripping off people through fraud. I'm getting lower level bills. I pump them into the slot machine. I tick it out. I go to the cage for all new, fresh, larger bills. So that can be an issue. The W-2Gs that come out when you get the tax form can be used for launderers to say, hey, look, I won this money. Look at my tax form. I got it from the casino. This isn't dirty money. I won it. Then, are you going to have an investigator that's going to go back and even follow that up? So there's pros and cons. I do, however, think that the slot machine is low. I think that is a low dollar amount. I can say that now that I work for myself, but that is low. But I will argue the $10,000 one nonstop.
Well, gentlemen, I hate to stop this fascinating conversation, but we're at the top of the hour. I'd like to remind our listeners that we're going to be going over to Clubhouse for a little while to finish the rest of this conversation. I would like to thank Tyler Burtis. Tyler, I think you might be a little paranoid, and I bet you're a real blast at parties. Appreciate that. John Kucera, I really appreciate you coming. But actually, seriously, guys, it was a great conversation, and I think this is only part of it. I think I need to continue it more because we just barely scratched the surface. We barely touched upon money laundering in California. We barely touched upon China. We barely touched upon crypto. So I think this is going to be a continuation of a conversation. Jason, thank you. It was a really great conversation. And also, if you're still here, you can click on the link in the chat real quick, and you can meet us over in the Clubhouse. And if not, I think you can email Jesse. Hold on, let me get that real quick.
While you're doing that, please get me on LinkedIn, also Burtis Investigations, as well as the www.tribalaffairs.taskforce.com is a web link that'll take you to more information about the Tribal Affairs Task Force.
Yeah, and as a matter, and as a matter of fact, we have a NIGA Clubhouse room on Clubhouse too, and that just happened last night too. So that's the first time. So look for the National Gaming Association Clubhouse room, and we'll see you there in a couple of minutes. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you guys.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.